Welcome back to The Globe on SABC News. We continue with our rolling coverage of the Zimbabwe elections. Elections in Zimbabwe are around the corner throughout the day. We have been bringing you the latest as the country prepares for a historical poll. Now, joining us now is Tshepiso Makwetla, who is in Bulawayo. Tshepiso, thank you so much for joining us. Now, the ZEC says it is ready to carry out the poll. Is it all systems go on the ground?
Lulu, by all accounts, from what they say, it seems everything is in place. And by now, the ZEC would have published guidelines, rules and regulations on how the process is going to unfold. For instance, when it comes to observers would know what their role is. One of the things that the ZEC, and of course, according to electoral law regionally and internationally, is that the role of observers is to observe. So they would not do anything that would hinder that work of electoral officials. And of course, if there's anything that they see that is objectionable, they are to report it to electoral officials. That would, of course, include fraud or irregularities. And they would have to observe things such as where ballot papers are kept, what conditions, who's present in the polling stations, and raise that to the attention of the electoral officials. It's also published information about the elections itself, where, for instance, polling stations will be. If political parties had any objections about the positioning of some of this, it would be a little too late for them to object now, because those polls would be published publicly and political parties would have an opportunity to object. But they would also give out information on what happens if you need assistance. For instance, if you're disabled, it is their responsibility to ensure that there are facilities for people who are disabled. If you would need assistance, for instance, then you are allowed to bring somebody to assist you, to take you to the polling station, even though your vote remains secret, as in that is ensured. This is where political parties, for instance, have raised the concern that this particular process may be used to, manipulate votes. In other countries, we've heard of incidents where voters have been given, whether it's the number on the list of the ballot paper, whom to vote for. There have been allegations that people have been paid to do that or look for this picture, and that is, of course, illegal. But there are other things that you can get information on. What happens if you spoil your ballot? What do you do? Where exactly the positioning of the ballot paper will be, etc. So all of that information has been published by the ZEC, saying that it is ready to roll out a successful election.
Tshepiso, have you managed to speak to some of the observers with regards to what they have observed so far after being in the country for a couple of days? What's their reaction to the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission's readiness for elections taking place on Monday?
Lulu, most of the observers have said that they are largely happy with the conditions, saying that they are conducive to a free and fair election, that there hasn't been any widespread reports of threats of violence or threats of intimidation, although some of them have raised concerns that these reports are streaming in, especially more towards the end of the campaigning period, which ends today at 12 midnight, that 24-hour period where campaigning is not allowed, starts at midnight. It's been said that has been increasing. The number that is, I think 2 days ago when we got here, the number of threats of violence was at about 200, but the actual number of acts of violence or intimidation was said to be at 14. But from what we've heard from the observer missions that we've spoken to, the conditions are largely satisfactory, and their hope is that nobody will disrupt these elections and keep them from being credible. And that would include threats in the past, and by the recent past, by opposition parties. The MDC Alliance had threatened, for instance, to march on the officers of the ZEC, accusing them of being biased, of not behaving according to the terms of the guidelines of electoral law. But opposition, or rather observer missions, have said they really think that nobody should be citing violence that would derail a process that is seemingly at this point conducive for free and fair elections.
Tapiso, earlier my colleague Simpiwe spoke to Peter Ndoro, and he was speaking to I think the Deputy Commissioner of Police in Zimbabwe, and she was stating the fact that police will be deployed and police are ready for any kind of reaction or action, or they are there to guide people with regards to ensuring that the elections run smoothly and fairly and people are satisfied and they're able to cast their ballots on Monday. In terms of the people on the ground, what's the atmosphere like in Bulawayo and the second largest city in Zimbabwe? What are people on the ground saying?
Well, as you know, that this is an area that has suffered in the past acts of terror, and by terror I mean intimidation at a very harrowing level. Some people have not only been forced and beaten to vote at certain polling stations, or whom to vote for, forced to go to certain political rallies. So there is an inane fear not only of the military but of security officials and how they would prevent a free and fair vote from occurring. So while there is that inane fear, people are saying that, it's been a while now in terms of the pre-election period, and they haven't seen any evidence of large-scale incidents of that, or really even widespread incidents of that nature. So they are feeling rather confident that they can go out there and vote. And some of those fears, and I suppose it's a hangover of people who believe they've been terrorized, who have in actual fact being tortured, and we've seen that largely happen in the rural areas. It's documented, well documented. It's in electoral reports of various observer missions and academic works. But the police have said this is a new era. They are here to help keep voters safe, help keep media practitioners and observer missions safe, help them to be able to go about their work. They've said, though, that they are ready for those who are spoiling for trouble. They've said that judiciary itself is ready because they will have special courts that will prosecute anybody who's found to be disrupting and even who may pose a danger in terms of threats of violence. But they say this is all legal. It's guided by the electoral law. It's guided by the Police Act. Various sections of those are very clear on how to deal with those incidents.
Tsepiso, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there for now. And that was SABC reporter Tsepiso Makwetla joining us live from Bulawayo in Zimbabwe as we continue our rolling coverage of the Zimbabwe elections taking place in Zimbabwe on Monday, the 30th of July. And I hand it over to